This is the Amp Hour Podcast, released November 20th, 2023, episode 651, Learning Computing with Jeff Geerling. Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Chris Gamble of Contextual Electronics.
And I'm Jeff Geerling from Jeff Geerling YouTube and all over the place. Also Geerling Guy. Some people know me as Geerling Guy from way back in the day.
Yeah. I was reading a Hacker News thread that said like, oh, I know Jeff from like Ansible and things like that. I didn't quite know what Ansible was, but I had seen you'd written a book about it and stuff like that. So I think most people will know your YouTube videos and if they don't know your YouTube videos, then we're going to send them there. That's for sure, right?
Definitely.
I think you might be one of the most calming voices in the technology industry. I just like watch your videos. I'm like, yeah, Jeff's got it. He's in hand, like, oh, Raspberry Pi 5. I'm not stressed,
Part of that is the fact that I record at night after my kids are in bed. It's like, it's my
yeah.
own, I got to get into a Zen state because the day was just crazy. That's how every day is,
Yeah. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. And, I think it lands. So like, you do all kinds of mini computers and you're kind of crossing the chasm between like small custom electronics all the way up to like server side stuff. I mean, how did that happen?
So it's funny. My dad is a radio engineer, and he actually had me start coming and helping him with things at the station. My brother and I both did this for years. We would come and have father son days at the station or whatever. I think it was more because like my mom needed somebody to watch him, and he knew that we were well behaved enough that we wouldn't break anything. But what I got to do was see the transition in radio from everything analog to everything digital, and in the midst of that, it was like anything from cleaning a cart machine to going up on the roof and cleaning something to building an antenna to replacing parts in something like a cassette deck and then starting to get into like working on AS400 file server, setting up Windows NT, fixing printers and things. So I got the whole gamut from software to hardware. The thing that I loved the most at the station was my dad had me documenting things. So eventually I actually got hired on at the station as an assistant engineer. And my first project was building an IT operations manual. So basically everything from like monthly maintenance tasks to everything goes off the air. What's the process for that? What things to check first in the studio? So I got to see the whole gamut, and I really loved the software side the most. That because it was when I was growing up, that was software was just eating the world, as it were. And so I got into web development. I got into programming for the web servers and things. And then it was really only in the past 5 or 10 years that I got back into the electronic side and the hardware side so much because I realized that all these things, so many things were kind of going out of the grasp of the common person to be able to do microelectronics and microcontrollers. And with the ESP devices and with the Raspberry Pi Pico, normal programmers who might have never touched hardware like me for many years could get back into it without having to learn all the deep down guts of how to
Yeah.
program a microcontroller and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I did. I was thinking about like kind of the top, like I kind of think of like what you're describing here is like kind of top down software coming back down into the hardware. And my experience was hardware going up into the software layer, and there's this different set of challenges, right? I mean, like for me, it's like as I'm like learning Zephyr and like device tree and just like Linuxy type thing. Like the struggles there are slightly different than a lot of the software people that I've taught in the past are like, well, what's this triangle with a line? I'm like, that's a diode, and they're like, yeah, but like, why does it do what it's doing?
Yeah.
And it's just like a different, I don't know, it's a different set of challenges. I feel like.
Yeah, yeah. I think that one of the hard things is a lot of people in our generation haven't had the experience of going from the circuit to the code. They
Yes.
just code things and you throw it up in the cloud, and you might never understand that there's transistors somewhere that's running this
Yeah.
stuff, and
Right.
they heat up, and there are problems, and there's cosmic rays, like all these things that you don't think about.
Right.
That if you want to be the best, you have to understand a lot of these things. And I would not qualify as even close to the best, I would say, in either software or hardware. I'm just good at putting a nice coat on the, painting it over and showing people how to do something. But
Well, there's best around explaining things though and like making it accessible. That's its own.
yeah,
It's a different
I
skill set,
think
right?
the
Yeah.
sad thing is that most of the people that are unbelievable at this stuff are just so bad at communicating it.
Yeah. Right.
You really
Right.
you need both,
Right.
and some companies are better at that, some individuals are better at that. So I try to put a spotlight on some things that I see that are really cool in the world, and I see a
Yeah.
lot around Raspberry Pis and single board computers, a lot around Linux and open source. So that's what I shine my spotlight on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot of pigeonholing as well, right? So I think about the people that are the best at like PLL design on, high end processors and things like that. Like that person's been sitting in a cube in Intel for 30 years. And like even if you wanted to get to them, they're going to tell you things that are like so niche and like awesome, of course, right? But they're not going to
Hmm.
be contextualized for kind of the broader audience or honestly very applicable to what is happening. So I feel like kind of that zoomed out view as well, being like, why does this matter for software and hardware and everything else? That
Yep.
is that is also really important.
Yeah, and I have another YouTube channel that I run with my dad called Geerling Engineering.
Hmm.
My goal is for us to get more into RF and electronics. Right now, we talk about a little bit of RF with tower site tours and things like that. But I think that like his generation, a lot of them are retiring. Some of them are even dying off,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's a whole set of knowledge that our generation has not gotten a lot of times because a lot of these companies don't have the sense of apprenticeship that we used to have where
Mm.
you'd work under somebody for a long time. And I got that from my dad because he let me work with him on big
Yeah.
projects. I went with him to tower sites when they were rebuilding towers, and he learned some of the electronics and the basic principles of things. And for me, I always thought, man, that looks so cool. I want to be able to do this stuff. And then I got into software,
Mm.
so I'm getting a little bit back into his stuff, but now it's for YouTube and things like that. So I'm not really in the weeds building
Right,
production
right, right, right.
hardware. So it's a lot different.
Yeah.
But I do want to bring that to other people and get people interested in this because, like for instance, AM radio, it's kind of dying off in the US. And
Right.
there's different opinions on whether it's even going to exist in 10 or 20 years as a commercial venture. But I'm trying to help my dad and extract that information from him in a way that's interesting to people so we can see, here's how that worked and you can really draw a connection from the circuit to what's happening in the magic of RF with
Yeah,
AM. It's
yeah.
harder to do that with FM because conceptually it's harder to explain FM to somebody that doesn't already know something about radio. With
Right,
AM, it's like
exactly.
more power, more signal, speaker goes vibrate. You can
Yeah,
draw
right,
that
right,
line
right.
between those things.
Right.
So
Wiggle here, wiggle there.
yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah,
think the same thing with computing, and that's why I like the Raspberry Pi Pico and the ESP32 and
yeah,
things like
yeah,
that because they are closer to that where you can understand my code and wires that go into this board bringing different signals across, and then my software can see that too and interact with it even if you
yeah.
don't understand the assembly. Or a lot of people, they might never even program and see it might all be Python, micro Python.
Yeah, MicroPython, CircuitPython's been just, like, opening up a lot of embedded. I feel like it's very, very accessible. It's awesome. I mean, the cycle time to go and, like, revise something is unbelievable as well.
Yes.
On the RF side of things, like, what level are you kind of investigating stuff at? You said, you're looking at AM radio and things like that. Are you also doing, like are you like a ham as well? Are you getting into that world building stuff, or is
I
it more
just got
commercial?
my license a few months ago. So,
Okay.
for years and years, I've thought, oh, that'd be cool to do, but I never was like, and I'm going to do it. This year,
Mhm.
I was like, my dad is not retired, but he's, at some point he's going to be retired and he has all this wealth of knowledge. And in my mind, I'm like, he could probably pass the extra exam without even thinking about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
With him, it's funny though, like he's been in broadcast engineering and he's had his
Sure.
broadcast FCC license and all that for years and years. He's dealt with 50,000-watt AMs and 30 kilowatt FMs, and he was part of the team that built what's called the super tower. We call it that in St. Louis. It has
Mhm.
8 FM stations combining to 300 kilowatts
Yeah.
with a megawatt of ERP broadcast out. So it covers all the St. Louis area. It was. I know I mean, looking at I
You have a video about that, I think, right? You
I
have a
do,
video, I
yeah.
think, on
Th
the I
there's a video
remember
the
seeing a video
yeah,
about that, yeah,
exploring the
yeah,
million watt,
yeah.
and then I was also like, "Is it really a million watts?" Because everybody's like, "It's not really
Right.
a million watts." It's like, "Well, let me
Yeah,
explain the
don't listen to
RPM."
people on the internet, come on, man.
So, I mean, technically it's 300,000 watts, but,
Yeah,
splitting hairs here because it's,
yeah,
we don't
yeah,
want to broadcast all the FM up into the atmosphere. That's
right,
not very useful unless you're in an
yeah.
airplane, I guess. Yeah, but it's, it he has all that knowledge, and I wanted to see, like, I want to I mean, he's the kind of guy who will keep a sharp mind, and he's a great grandpa. He loves playing with the kids and everything too, and the kids always see his desire to learn. But I also
Mm,
wanted him to get into a hobby that can take that knowledge that he's gained from radio
I see,
and
yeah.
continue it on. So I'm trying to get him into software. He's still a hardware guy. I mean, he does
Yeah,
some
oh,
IT
that's
stuff. I mean,
uh-huh,
everybody in radio does IT now because it's all IP. But he still has all that knowledge from transmitter setup and studio builds and all that that I want to get
mm,
him into. Maybe he could make a really cool rig, and he actually carries around his radio on his hip all the time. He
nice,
has his little
nice.
handheld, so
I don't know. I mean, I guess probably he's too deep in the world of like having a license and understanding that stuff. And maybe like he just starts a pirate station once he retires. He's just like, you know what? I'm
he's
going off the script.
he's the kind of engineer that would work with other engineers to like fox hunt somebody that was doing something illegal,
Yeah,
and
right, right,
because
right.
he's like, oh my, it's clipping into our signal in this little region. Like, he's one of the few engineers that still cares so much. It seems like corporate in radio broadcast in the U.S. has been falling out. They're more into streaming and internet
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
and I get it. The revenues, the growth opportunities are definitely not there with broadcast
Hmm.
radio as
Yeah.
these days. But it's still a huge thing. So he would have stuff in his car, and he'd be monitoring signals and stuff. He'd call the FCC and talk to them, and so
Wow.
he's not like an
Calling the
enforcer,
FCC
but
on purpose instead of like, oh, I
yeah,
messed up. That's
no,
usually I'm calling him like, oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, but and he's worked with so many different hams before. Like, some of the
Yeah.
antennas work that he's done, he said, like,
Mm,
the hams are the guys who I talk to about this stuff
yeah.
because they know it better than he does, because they're sitting
Okay.
there experimenting. He's like, I just need to get the antenna up and I need to make sure it's working right and I
I
have the
see. Yeah.
broadcast equipment. Plus, he can get some money and buy a new thing, whereas a
Right.
ham
Yeah.
might be like, I'm going to get everything I can out of this antenna.
Hmm. Yeah. That's cool. No, that's definitely a great hobby. Ham is going through transitions too. We've had people on the show
Hmm.
here talking about it. Digital modes, things like that. Our
Yep.
friend Jeff Kaiser is a big ham, and it's interesting space. I mean, like it's going through transformations, but it's not quite there yet. It does
Yeah.
it. I think 10 to 15 years, as I mean, because there's some like old hams as well. I mean,
Yeah, it's
God
it's
bless them,
amazing seeing the
but
differences. Like, when I took my test, it was, everybody was 60 plus, like
yeah, oh yeah,
easily
yeah. The
60
ones like
plus.
administering it and stuff.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can tell, like, they're like, I got my thing and I talk on the radio and it's my thing.
Right,
It's whereas I'm like, I want to connect the Raspberry Pi, I want to do some digital stuff.
right.
I want to like emulate some TV transmission. I want to bounce off the
Mhm.
moon. I want to, all these fun things, but in ways that are a little different than the old, like, sitting in your chair and talking
Mm,
like you're on CB radio or something. So
right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I have QSL cards. I've only sent one to my dad because he was my first and only contact so far.
Okay,
But
okay.
I do want to do some of that for the fun of it, see how it is, and also, build a little collection of contacts.
Yeah. I saw, it's interesting too, just like the combination with the internet and like all this ham stuff. I saw this site the other day, and of course it was like written in, hand coded HTML. It was just like hideous. It's great. It really, sorry, it felt unique and very, very real. But it was like you could then tap into SDRs all over the world, and like potentially you could transmit from your house and then like listen on the radio, the SDR that's in Russia, and be like, did I
Yeah.
get there? Like that's
Yeah, and I know sometimes I pop up in Kiwi SDR, and it's
yeah.
even if you want to listen to, like, what is the WWV, listen to the time signal or something, just
Oh, right,
or
right, right.
see
Yeah.
how certain signals propagate at night.
Yeah.
We're actually going to post a video on Camo X, which is a 50 kilowatt AM here in St. Louis.
Okay.
We did a tour of their facility, and we had like 3 hours of footage, and I'm like, we got to make this digestible. So we got it down to 44 minutes with the help
Uh,
of an editor who's really good at just cutting things out. Because if I did it, I'd be like, oh, but that's so interesting, and
yeah,
it's
right.
like,
Got to keep
yeah,
that
but
in. Come on.
if you want to get more than 10 views on the video, you got to cut some stuff. But, you know, you
Yeah.
can pop that open and see where, like in Oklahoma, how strong is the signal in New
Mm.
York, and it's amazing to see that and learn more about the different types of signals too.
So what about that? I mean, you mentioned the getting people to kind of care and listen and stuff like that. I did notice that you have YouTube Shorts and you're a very digital native kind of person. You definitely understand the media landscape, that sort of thing. But kind of at a high level, how are you keeping people interested in this stuff? I mean, some of it is maybe natural, but I think some of it is also your style, right? Like some of it's the topic area, but definitely how you do it and present it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two halves to it. One is you have to be interested in it to get other people interested, and I think that's like the number one reason why I don't watch corporate stuff almost ever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's really hard to watch corporate videos on something. But as an example, I have this server. It's called the Mars 400, and it's from a company called Embedded somewhere. I think they're in Taiwan,
Hmm.
or maybe I don't remember. I'm not going to say where exactly I think they are because I don't know, and maybe it's in a place that's affiliated with somewhere that gets you blacklisted or whatever.
Got it.
But anyway, I have the server, and like their videos for it are like I think it's really cool, and I can see that through their video, and I you can tell that the engineer thinks it's cool, but they just can't communicate that. So when I take it, I see like inside of it, there's 8 ARM nodes. It's actually 8 servers in one with 8 drive bays and 2 power supplies and 2 switches. So to me, it's like this is like everything a Raspberry Pi cluster wants to be. It's a commercial product. It's reliable.
I
It
see.
has dual redundancy for everything. And if you put 3 in your rack, you can do a full upgrade while you're copying files over to a Ceph cluster running on these things. Like to me, it's like this is cool. It's the fulfillment.
Jeff, you might have to explain some of these terms to me too. Sorry, I'm not.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like on my channel, I've done a bunch of Raspberry Pi clusters where you put a bunch of Raspberry Pis together, and everybody always asks, like, "But what would you do with that? What's so important about building a cluster of Raspberry Pis? Why not just like buy one little PC that's faster than them?" And it's like it's not about the speed; it's about the learning and the opportunity. You put
I
these
see.
things together. You have to learn networking. You have to learn how to power them. You have to learn how to manage them, and not everything in the world can fit on one computer. You can scale up one computer a lot, but you can't
I
scale it
see.
infinitely. So there's a point where everybody has to go to multiple computers, and you can learn that on $35 or $60 Raspberry Pis, or you could learn it on PCs that use a lot more energy and they have fans that are louder and they create more heat and stuff. So I choose to do it on Pis. And when you see these things like this Mars 400 product, it's that but commercialized. And then you realize, okay,
Mhm.
so now all these skills I learned on the Raspberry Pi can actually be useful in the real world for
Hmm.
a storage server or for other types of servers that are out there.
Okay, and then you're starting to kind of emulate the kind of the infrastructure of the internet as well. Is that kind of the thinking
Yeah,
there? Because you'd have a database somewhere and you'd have store, like
yeah.
long term storage somewhere else. That sort of idea.
For years and years, I hosted a Drupal website. Drupal is an open source content management system, and it runs a ton of the top like 1,000 websites.
Yeah, yeah.
And I ran it on a Pi cluster. And not only do you learn how to split up services and manage the cluster, but I found one bug with the way that Drupal generated aggregated CSS files. So it would like take your CSS and put it all into one file, and then it would save that to the file system to serve up more quickly instead of serving a bunch of CSS files.
Hmm.
There was a bug in the way that it did that if you were on a cluster and the cluster's disk access was slow, like it would be on a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, right.
It uncovered that bug more deeply. Like some people were having this on real clusters, but that's because if you run your stuff on Amazon or on Google or whatever, sometimes disks are slow. Most of the time they're not, but sometimes they
Right.
are. And so it's really hard to debug there. But on the Pi, it exposed that flaw because it's always slow.
Mhm.
So it's funny, it's a random thing, but there is value in doing things smaller scale and learning on a test cluster like that.
Yeah,
It's not just about getting clicks, it also is interesting. People love seeing like what can you do with something that's totally underpowered for the purpose.
yeah,
How far can you take it? It's kind of like if you build a rice rocket like a car and you stuff things into it and make it go really fast. That's
right.
that's what I like to do with Raspberry Pis a lot of times.
That's great. No, I think that's a that strategic slowness, right? That strategic
Mhm.
it's like basically like stress testing a system, right? It's like
Yeah.
stress testing how you might deploy in the real world. And
Yeah.
like you said too, I think the fact that a lot of these cloud services, you can just chuck more money at it most of the time,
Mhm.
like, or
Yeah.
hand it off to someone else's DevOps ability, like, yeah, that's great until it's not.
Yeah,
And
and the
y-
constraint gives me a story automatically,
mm,
which is a big difference, like,
interesting.
so I don't do a video without a story. Even if it's like a simple review type video, I need to
Uh,
have a story for it, otherwise it's not like, I look at I subscribe to probably 3 or 400 YouTube channels, and I
is
watch a
that all?
ton of videos.
Okay.
I watch way too much, I'm sure my wife would say like, "Yeah, he watches too much YouTube." But I like to see that, like, there are some creators on YouTube who I see have that same kind of, like, they wanna have a story, not a product. And even if you're just a review channel, which I would say I'm not that. I review a lot of things, but it's not reviews most of the time. It's like, here's a challenge, and I use this thing to achieve my goal. But having the constraints of a Raspberry Pi or a microcontroller or a budget or something that has the story of, here's my, here's the battle. I'm against the budget, or I'm against the speed of this thing, and
Yeah,
how am I
yeah.
going to overcome that challenge? And that's more enticing than, this is a really cool thing. It has a processor. It's like, nobody cares about that. And
Mm.
yeah,
Right, right.
so
Yeah, exactly.
so it's like, what is the challenge? What is the opportunity? And how did you solve it? And or how did you fail spectacularly every once in a while?
Yeah. So, okay, if I'm taking the perspective of the hardware person coming up the stack, and you're going to take the perspective of the software person coming down the stack, for someone like me, what is the project that you would point people at? So, like, the cluster might be the constrained, stressful thing for testing all these things out, but what is the project you point them at to then go and put onto that cluster? Like, is there like a starter project that you always point people at for that sort of thing?
I like practical things that people could actually find useful. So one of the things that I set up, I have a project called Pi Cluster on my GitHub account. If you go to GitHub and go to Geerling Guy, it's called Pi-Cluster. That project is my example Pi cluster, but what it sets up is a thing called Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is its own kind of thing. It actually uses
Yeah.
K3s, which is like a lightweight Kubernetes. But once you get something running, the first challenge is getting your cluster running. Once you get it running, there's so many things you can deploy to it with relative ease. Upgrading things is a different challenge, but deploying things to it. So what I have running in my house right now is an internet monitor. So I have another project called, I think, Internet-Pi on GitHub. That's running using containers that it deploys this thing called Prometheus. It deploys a thing called Grafana, and another container that does the actual like internet speed checking with speedtest.net or something. So it
Yeah.
tracks
Okay.
that over time, and then you can see like how fast is my internet. And then once you have those things, again, it's building blocks. You can put other data into it. So I had my Shelly smart plugs dumping their power usage data into it. I had, for a time I had Starlink, and I would have all the Starlink statistics, like,
Okay.
how many
Yeah.
satellites does it see, how reliable is the connection, all that data would go into it, and then you can build these dashboards and see that. So that's an actually kind of useful thing that you can do with it, and it doesn't
Yeah.
need to be fast to do that. Raspberry Pis are perfectly adequate.
Yeah. That kind of sounds like a home lab kind of setup too. Is that the kind of the high level piece there?
Yeah, yeah, and in I have a rack, which is more than a lot of people have for their home lab. Most people have like
Mhm.
a shelf, or they have
Mhm.
their router and they might flash something to the router or something.
Okay.
But I,
Yeah.
I have a rack in my home lab, and I have my NASA's, the storage for YouTube, because I just need tons of space for
Yeah.
video. But I also have a little thing with 4 Raspberry Pis now. It used to have 6 and it was 5, now it's 4. And the 4 Raspberry Pis run the internet monitoring, they run Home Assistant, so I can automate
Mm.
things without having to pay for cloud service or give my information to one of the cloud providers. And then it has a VPN, so I can access my home network anywhere, which has come in handy many, many times. If we're on a vacation and the kids want to watch one of their TV shows, I can grab it off my home NAS and we can watch it at the hotel. So that's kind of fun. And then I also still run a website called pydramble.com. That was the cluster that used to run Drupal. Now it's just a single Raspberry Pi that's been running. I've had like 99.999% uptime from my home lab using a home ISP connection. So,
Wow.
beat that, Amazon.
Yeah, okay. So if I had to summarize kind of the things that you are doing with these clusters, and so like the projects that people could do, I think definitely like website hosting type of stuff. So they kind of self-host type of activities. The VPN's a
Mhm.
good one, I think, as well for kind of tunneling into your own home setup, storage for sure. And then the home assistant thing is, like basically localized IoT control.
Yeah.
That's such a cool project. We haven't had many people on the show about that, but it's like I feel like that actually is one of the best like computing side down to like embedded side
Yes.
because a lot of people can make their own projects and stick it onto home assistant as well.
Yeah, if you haven't heard of ESP Home, ESP
Yeah.
Home is like what makes all that amazing, especially
Yeah.
for somebody that does electronics. Like you can take those little ESP chips or a Raspberry Pi Pico, or there's I think a couple other chips supported, and you just wire up whatever. It could be a button
Yeah.
or contact. People are making mailbox opening sensors, and
Yep.
I have
Yep.
garage door sensors wired up to it, and it's very simple, very easy to understand. And instead of sitting there programming C and API accesses and
Yeah.
all that, you literally just have a little file that says like, I have the ESP-C3 or whatever the board is, and I have a switch connected to these GPIO lines, and
And that's it.
that's it. You tell it
Yeah.
that, and then Home Assistant's like, "Oh, your garage door's open." It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so much easier than it used to be when you had to basically do programming to get your hardware to
Mhm.
do stuff. So now it's
Yep.
literally just connect the wires together and you're done.
Yeah, it's a YAML file, right?
Yeah,
That's on there
it's
for
just
the ESPN.
and people are like, "Oh, I hate YAML." For me, YAML is like a godsend. I used to work in XML all the time
Yeah.
to the point where I
Yeah.
used to write some parsers that were just XML was the worst thing ever to work with.
I see curly brackets in my dreams.
You're basically working with like web browser type language, and web browsers
Yeah.
are some of the most complex software things ever. XML was not fun. And then JSON came along, and JSON was so much better. But then if you're a human that's trying to read this configuration, it's so hard because there's no comments. So you just have a bunch of it's like pseudocode in there sometimes, and
Mhm.
that just never jived with my brain structure. YAML really jived with it because you can have comments and all that, but the white space is a little funny. Some people don't understand
Ah,
like for me, I've always before YAML was even in existence, I set up my code editor to highlight spaces and like spaces on the end of lines and when there are misalignments, and it would always highlight invisible characters. So I knew that there was a tab or a space or something. So a lot of
right.
people press tab and have tabs on, and it does get to be a little tedious. But for
Right.
me,
Well,
it was
let's not
perfect.
do tabs versus spaces on this show. I mean, like, yeah.
Yeah, we could start up a few
Whole episode of
few
Silicon Valley. How about
yeah,
that?
a few wars on that.
Yeah, I mean, I like the files just because like when someone's like, "How do I pronounce your last name?" I'm like, "Well, it's pronounced like YAML," you know. So here we go.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think so. What do you have then? So you said garage door openers. What else are you building locally for that sort of thing?
I have my lights all into it now, but I have a few automations. So I have it actually texts us if we leave the garage doors open for
Ah, that's
longer
nice.
than 10 minutes,
Mhm.
because I am famous for leaving the garage door open. And then for me, I grew up like we just opened the garage door and you had it open all the time. But
Right.
nowadays,
Yep.
apparently, that's not you don't want to do that. So my wife is like, "You left the garage door open." So I put a thing and it texts us anytime that we leave it open for more than 10 minutes. I actually have a display board that I'm going to set up with like current weather and time, and
Mm,
then I'll also have it like flash when there's a notification like garage doors open. We also tied in. I started tying in the security system, but our security system's a bit old. But you can do
mm,
automations that are kind of cool, like when the security system's on, have it automatically turn off other things because you're not home. Or at my new office space, I'm setting up Home Assistant too, which is funny because it's like my office assistant there. But someone mentioned like, I have a light that I want to come on when I come in the back door, and I had set up a motion detector, and I was like, "This is
yeah.
cool, motion detector." But he was like, "When you disarm your security system, just have the light come on." And I'm like, "Oh, that actually works better because
Yeah.
you
Right.
don't need to
Right.
rely on a motion detector."
Right.
But I like the redundancy, so I'll probably still have both in place. But there's things like that. It's the hardware is there, and then the software can make it better.
Right.
But for me, and I mentioned this in that video that I made on it, it's not smart. Like there's a lot of companies that sell smart devices, but it's not smart unless it's local and it's additive and it's
Yeah.
private. So all the data has to be local. It has to be additive, meaning like if you automate a light switch, you don't want to take the light switch out of the loop. You want to still have a switch. You just want to make it so that you can automate the switch. You know, you can add on top of it. And a lot of these companies don't do that. There are so many products that are not made to enhance what's already there. They're made to replace it, and then it makes it
Right,
less
exactly.
smart,
Don't
in my
They
opinion.
don't control the actual physical switch on and off now. It's like, no,
Yeah,
no, that's an all digital switch. And if you're lucky, the power's on, and you'll be able to use your own light.
yeah, exactly. And
And the web service and the API is available
yeah,
and
exactly.
we're
The
not shut
API goes
down. And
down, and then all of a
yeah,
sudden,
yeah.
oops, your thermostat doesn't work anymore, and you're gonna freeze to death tonight. You know,
Yeah,
like
right.
that. That I had a Nest. I bought the Nest because I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm amazed. It didn't go down for us, but I saw a report that in some parts the API went down and people couldn't
Mm,
change their temperature and some of them went offline and things. And I was like, all right, the Nest is gone. I'm going back to a local,
mm,
it's like Train or whatever, just the normal thermostat, but it has an
mm.
integration. So again, it's local and it has their service that I run for it. But if I disconnect the internet, it's still perfectly fine and I can control it through Home Assistant still.
Yeah, I think I'm actually really glad at that migration. So I'm looking at your YouTube titles as well, and you have a similar kind of thing about like the NAS piece, right? So like having your own localized media, that sort of thing, not
Hmm.
relying on web services, because I think that as a even though I work for an IoT company, right? I mean, like having localized control is super important. You need to have
Yeah.
intelligence down there. You need to like take advantage of the connection when it's there, but then still be able to act no matter what. I feel like that
Hmm.
should be a key piece, and Home Assistant really allows for that sort of thing. You might still hook into Alexa or
Yeah.
Hey Google or whatever. I hope I may have just messed up some people's systems at home, but Alexa, order $1 million worth of tofu. Sorry, I don't know. I don't know what a weird one to be, but I think that you could still hook into those without it being like reliant on those. And I think
Yeah.
the systems that do that are going to win long term
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and those are the companies that I think we're still so early in the whole mix of smart stuff. You know,
Yeah.
and I think back to like there was X10 and all that, which was the opposite. It wasn't cloud connected at all, but like
And
the people
I don't
that
know.
built their homes out with that stuff, now it's like
What is X10? I'm thinking X11. I'm like X11 like the display server? Like
no, no, it was like a really well, not really old. It came about and is kind of defunct in my lifetime, I guess. So not that
Mm,
old, but it was a home. It was kind of a smart homes before it was IoT type smart homes, all
okay.
hardwired circuits and things.
But was it a standard or just like a single company did it?
I think it was a vendor, but they had some uptake. They had a lot of home builders and things would integrate, and it kind of went away. But now the people with those products in their houses have to build connectors to bridge it over to Home Assistant or something else
I
because
see.
it's
Yeah.
gone. So that's why a lot of people have asked why do you do it this way if there's this other thing that's already perfect for it, and it's like, well, because I'm thinking in 25 years to 40 years, do I want to have
Yeah.
to redo this, or is it okay to wait and do it
Yeah.
a little bit worse now if I know that it's going to still work in 25 years?
Yeah, it's like building your own infrastructure basically, right?
Yeah.
It's like and I think that's the other interesting thing. Like so much of the stuff that we buy is especially like consumer level stuff, like that's what we've been lured into. Like, I'll buy
Hmm.
a $20 smart switch and it's like, how am I paying only $20 for this? And the answer is
Yeah.
because it's subsidized by a service or whatever else. And it's
Yep.
like it doesn't have infrastructure in there. It doesn't have like that natively because infrastructure is more expensive and
Hmm.
time consuming and all that other stuff. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like you might be paying more time and money right now, but you will have be building your own infrastructure
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah, that's the goal. And every device that I buy, a few of them are cloud connected, but most of them, it's like to me, sometimes that's an anti feature to have
Mm,
any kind of
yeah.
cloud connection. There are certain things like security systems, you need it because you want them to call the police if you're not home, so
Mm,
you can't not have it. But for some things like my switches and my light bulbs and things, I don't want that at all. Like
mm,
if I really need to turn off my lights while I'm in some other place on vacation, I have my VPN. but not
I have
everybody has
neighbors.
that. So I also understand the convenience aspect,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's hard if you work in the technology industry. You realize how hard security is, and then you also realize I don't want to have 300 holes in my firewall for
Yeah,
every single device that I own. I don't want my
yeah.
fridge to pop a hole in my firewall that lets a hacker come in and take over my YouTube.
Right, right. Yeah, right. That is I guess it does centralize some of your stuff. It's all centralized at some point, right? Even if you have it
Yeah.
all in the cloud. But yeah, that is pretty interesting. What about like I know a lot of people that are in a similar position to you, like that just kind of eschew smart stuff entirely. So like what is your motivation
Mhm.
behind having smart stuff in the house in the first place?
It's just the convenience. Like
Okay.
for a lot of little things, like the lights, 90% of it is I'm so lazy. I don't want to like if you're carrying a box in your office, you don't want to also hit the button. So I think the biggest thing, the most influential smart device thing that we did, which is technically not connected to Home Assistant. It's just a motion sensor switch. I installed new lights in the garage, and they're on a motion sensor switch. So now every time that we open the door to throw away a bag of trash into our trash can, the light comes
Mm,
on right away. And we could have done a door switch or something too, but the point of it is, before that, every time that we did that, we either were like, okay, I have this big bulky thing in my hands. It's pitch black. The kids might have left their bike here, and I'm going to trip over it. And,
true, true.
or you can like lean down and turn on the light, and then you might drop some of the trash. It's just a bad situation. So that was
I like this though. No, this is great. This is now the caption for this episode is Jeff Geerling finds PIR sensors to be the most the most enabling technology. It's
I mean,
great.
I don't know, those kind of things, like, it's such a life-changing difference. You wouldn't think
Yeah.
like, nowadays, I don't think about it at all, but when I did that, the first few times that we did it, was like magic, like, "Oh my gosh, our lives just improved." We went from, like, caveman to, like, we can do anything in the world now, and
Yeah,
it's the
yeah.
first step. So,
Okay. Yeah.
everything beyond that is just improving that kind of setup. At the office, I actually have some human presence detectors
Mm.
using the little millimeter wave or whatever, the radar
Yeah,
system.
yeah. Those things are popping right now. There's a lot of new
Yeah,
sensors
so
there.
I'm gonna try facing off 3 or 4 different ones and see which
Okay.
ones I like the best for installation, for range, for ability to get them into Home Assistant. One is Zigbee, one is Wi-Fi, another I think 2 of them are Wi-Fi, and 2
Mm,
of them are Zigbee. So I'm gonna see how that all works together and, see if there's any weird I'm in an area that has, like, 3 radio towers around it, so
mhm.
like, the key fob on my car doesn't work sometimes when I'm, like, 5 feet
It's
away.
flooded. Yeah.
Yeah, so and one of those towers is the super tower that has, like,
Mm,
35 services hanging off of it. Like, if you look at it, there's, like, antenna, antenna, antenna all the way up, all the way on both sides. So,
yeah.
I'm sure one of those is, like, beaming something straight at my office that's gonna interfere with things, but
Mm, yeah.
it's worked out so far for the simple things I put in.
That's another interesting piece of, like, that idea of, like, needing infrastructure is, like, it's gotta always work, right? Like,
Mhm.
the reliability piece is super important too. Like if you are building your own infrastructure, building your own thing, it's like I was just about to ask you, like, why would you be using a Zigbee sensor? Why wouldn't you build your own? But the answer is probably because you want to make sure it's
Yeah.
always up and working as well, right? Even if it's local and
And
additive
this
and
is for my office. So the nice thing, most people that do YouTube don't have a separate space. A lot of people do it in their home.
oh yeah, yeah.
I think in the past few years, we've seen more people turn it into an actual business with
Hmm.
space and all that,
Yeah.
which is for me. There's two reasons. One is I can walk from my home to the studio. It's not a short walk, but it's
Oh,
not a
nice,
super long
nice.
walk either. But it's automatic exercise. So,
Is this in like St. Louis winters even you could do that? I mean, St. Louis summers as well, I guess. St. Louis has some extreme weather actually.
yeah, it gets really hot and it gets really cold.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
year it got up to like 112
Oh, wow.
Fahrenheit,
Yikes.
which is hot.
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
that is in Celsius, just hot, like 40 something.
40 something, yeah.
Yeah, but and then in the winter it gets down to -5, -10 a few days, but normally in the tens or 20s Fahrenheit again. So yeah, it gets both ways, but put on a coat and some pants and you'll get there.
Midwestern values there.
Yeah, exactly. But it's good for the heart, even if
It's
your
good for
heart's
the
like
that's right.
not doing well afterwards. But that was one of the motivations. The other one is just space. there's so many projects that I want to do. I have boxes of all the little electronics kits and things that I want to
Yeah.
assemble and build some different sensors and boards. I just don't have the desk space anymore because taken up by Pi projects and taken up by servers that I'm testing and all that. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's always a balance when you're on YouTube. Since I chose to make this my career at this point, you have to make money to survive. So you can't just like do only
You
the
did
fun
mention
things.
family. You have a family, so
Yeah, I
yeah.
have a family with 4 kids, and I have
Yeah.
a pre-existing condition, so I have to have pretty expensive health insurance here in the US.
All right. Yep. Yep.
So you got to earn money. So you can't just only do fun projects. And the other hard thing is I have to record things while I'm doing it, and I have to structure it in a way that is a story. So each week is spent on these things, and I just don't have the time and the space. But what I used to be able to do before about a year ago, when I got into full time YouTube, was I'd have space somewhere and I'd set up a project and I'd work on it over the course of a few months.
Got
But
it. Yeah.
as we all do, your spaces start filling up. But in my case, like there is no space anymore. So I don't have any of those projects going on anymore. They're
Yeah.
all in little boxes right now. So the office is
Yeah.
going to let me work on a lot more of those things because I have, well, I will have more space on desktops. And I bought a few rolling carts that I will use just for these projects. But then in 2 years, I know I'll be saying the same
Yeah,
thing.
I was gonna say, this is echoes of my co-host Dave, who said, just a bigger office. That's all I need is a bigger
Yeah.
office. And it's just like,
Yeah, at some point you have like a 18,000 square foot warehouse and
yeah,
you're like, I
exactly.
need more
Yeah.
space. Where did it all go?
Maybe if I did like multiple levels of benches, maybe if I, I had
I've
like
been
a
thinking about that.
1 foot
I
bench,
bought
2 foot
these.
bench.
I bought a few things with like multiple shelves, and I'm like, I could do that, and I'm like, no, this is just gonna turn into storage. I know it.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I have the, rolling cart with the, project trays. That was a
mhm.
former guest, Ken, who told us about that, and
Yep.
I love the idea. It has not worked out like I thought it has. It's basically just, like, lots of
It
junk
won't.
on each tray.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that's great. So on the, you're sliding down into the embedded space. I mean, what else are you excited on the embedded side of things?
I think some of the things that are most interesting to me are the fact that there's chips now that can do so much in such a small space. So you can have some AI acceleration. Even like the new Raspberry Pi 5, it's now fast enough that it's like what a computer was 5 or 8 years ago. A good laptop 5 or 8 years ago is what the
Yeah.
Raspberry Pi is now, and you can strap that thing to anything almost, and you can compress video better, so you can get camera data in and process it and compress it, send it out somewhere, stream stuff. So some of those things are interesting to me. It's hard though because AI today is like what crypto was a couple years ago. There are so many things that are
Full of
just
snake oil?
it's blatant scams
Yeah.
and people who are just in it to earn a lot of VC money.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see what things are actually things to get excited about and what things are like this is totally illegal what they're doing with the data and all that. And at some
Yeah.
point the music is going to stop, and who's not going to have a chair at the table anymore.
Oh
So
boy. Musical chairs reference. Didn't expect that one, Jeff, I gotta say.
yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean,
Few bits,
with
few
with
bits.
crypto, it seems like that's Sam Bankman Fraud or whatever his name is.
Yeah, yeah.
With him and all that group of people, it seems like they're finally starting to get filtered out, and
Mm,
because there are some cool things about cryptocurrencies that I was excited about 10 years ago, and it just totally I was totally not excited for the past 5 or so years because of all the
mm,
the grifters and scams and things. So
mhm.
it's similar like that with AI right now. And the other hard thing is we're not yet to the point where everybody can build their own models for machine learning
Right, yep.
because to do a good model requires so much hardware right now that only the big companies can do it. So you have to use their stuff, and like I said, it doesn't feel like they're all being above the board with how they collect their data and all that. Like
Oh,
when,
definitely,
when I
yeah.
search ChatGPT, I see things that it's like I know that I wrote part of that and it's copyrighted. How are they just verbatim pasting a line or two from
Yeah,
my thing into their answer here?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think there's still a lot of issues that has to be dealt with there. But it is
mm,
what excites me because it's not going to replace our intelligence. But it's like when you know how to use Google really well. Well,
mm,
not Google anymore because they just have ads most of their pages. It's like
DuckDuckGo.
when you know DuckDuckGo really well, and it accelerates your own thinking. You can get
Yes.
something
Yeah.
out quicker. You can find the right resource. You can fill in the blanks in your own brain, and I think
Yeah,
that's
totally.
what excites me, and the fact that that could be on a little chip, like in your smart light bulb.
Yeah.
Probably not in your light bulb, but you could have actually intelligent local assistants and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like for, like, PCB layouts one where I keep seeing stuff like, "Oh, we'll do all your whole PCB layout for you," whatever, whatever.
Mhm.
I don't no, I don't want that, I don't need that, I don't like, that's first off, that just gives me bad feels about, like, my livelihood, and then also beyond that though, like, it's just I know, like, in my gut that there's nothing that's going to be able to just be done. Like, it might
Mhm.
give me something, it might be fine for small stuff, but, like, I'm gonna be involved, so, like, once I internalize that, like you said, like, once I make it a tool for my own capabilities, I'm gonna be ramped up and doing more stuff with it.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. Like, that actually does I think
Yeah.
that makes a ton of sense because it's an enhancement tool, and, like, that's great. I'll lean into those things, I
Yeah,
think.
like right now I have a database of all the videos that I've done, all the text that I've written for them.
Yeah.
Most of my
Yeah.
videos are scripted. So I can
Yeah.
search through that and find clips and things. But like for instance, one of the things that AI could actually help with is if I have my whole library of all the media I've ever shot
Yeah.
and all the footage and all the videos, the final edits and things, and it could like parse out the Final Cut Pro XML file and say like, "Oh,
Yeah.
here's the thing that you were talking about 2 years ago with this
Yeah, give me a
topic.
callback,
Just
right? I want a
pull that
callback for
out
the
and then give it to me." That saves
yeah,
me, 10 minutes, 12 minutes here and there,
yeah,
and that would be super valuable for me, those kind of
yeah,
things, but it's not like, "Write me a video about the new Raspberry Pi
yeah,
7." It's like,
yeah.
it's not gonna be good, ever.
Well, it'll be based on your past videos, it'll be pulling
I
those
know,
scripts and,
that's the thing,
just
like, you see all these articles, and it's like, that's AI, and it's very derivative, and it's not making the world a better place, that's for sure,
yeah, yeah, agree,
so
agree. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Pi because you've had so many great videos about the Pi 5. I'd love to just kinda get your, you're like an analyst at this point as well. What's your analyst view on the Pi 5?
It's it's hard to peg it as anything yet because they haven't introduced a cheaper one. I think the Pi 5 could make more inroads as a $40. If they had a $40 1 gig or 2 gig version, I think that that would sell more like hotcakes. I mean, anything that they make right now is selling like hotcakes because there's always demand for pies.
Sure, yeah.
But it's not as fast. The Pi 4 was way faster than all the other okay-ish SBCs when it was introduced. The Pi 5 is not faster than all the Rockchip RK3588 boards, and it's not more efficient either. So from a hardware perspective, it's not quite as good as them. From a software perspective, it's still better because the maintenance and the support are so much better on the Raspberry Pi Linux distributions. One thing that I've been pushing for, and I know some people in the community push for, is getting to a point where a Raspberry Pi is like a PC where you could just download any version of Linux and install it. You don't have to have custom versions with all the
Got
right
it,
for the
yeah.
Raspberry Pi. That's been a problem in the ARM ecosystem, but the Pi 5 is getting closer, but still not there for that.
What is the restriction there? Just like the build, like who's building for these different systems?
It's mostly like the bootloaders and the way that they initialize. They don't have them set up with. There's a thing in ARM called system ready. They don't
Mhm.
have them set up with UEFI or something like that, a standard to get the system to boot. So you have to put in the device tree and you have to put in all the special things
Ah,
for each board. And to me that's annoying. It's a problem that I think stems from them being so low end that it was kind of a necessity to do that stuff. But now these boards all have enough memory and they have enough CPU to be able to do these things. I don't know. It's not a huge priority for Raspberry Pi because they sell every board that they make right now.
yeah.
But I think it could be a game changer if you could just buy a Raspberry Pi and download Windows for ARM, which doesn't exist. You have to hack it to get that. But if you could download Windows or download Linux or
Oh,
whatever,
Jeff, don't do that. No Windows for ARM on come on.
it it's the crazy thing is Windows for ARM is great, but the software support for it is so not there.
Hmm, interesting.
But I've been running Windows on my Ampere workstation, the one that has 128 cores, and
That's what it takes to do Windows for ARM these days, 128
well,
cores.
it's funny. It currently dominates the Cinebench for any desktop computer, the
Mm,
2024 benchmark, and it's only
mm,
running on 64 cores on that machine. The Cinebench
mm,
has a weird bug running on more than 64 cores on ARM, and they used to have that bug with Threadripper systems too, I think, where they had more than
mm.
64 cores. But I mean, to me, it's like if you can get your system to be as open and usable as possible, that just enables more things. Like more
Sure.
people might
Yeah.
start porting games from Windows to Windows for ARM, which might make them work better on
I see.
Linux for ARM too.
Got
All
it.
the
So
things
you're
I
just
just
saying like
finished.
ecosystem type moves like that would be beneficial. It would benefit everyone kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Got it.
and a
What
lot of people who might not use a Raspberry Pi, if you could get Windows on it and it was native, which it is, it's hard to get it put onto a Raspberry Pi right now because it doesn't have system ready.
hmm.
That would bring a new audience of people who are like, "Well, it can't run Windows, so I can't run whatever," you know?
Yeah, I don't know.
I hate Windows, by the way, just to put that out there.
No, no, no. It's I mean, it's not I don't I yeah, it's all it is what it is, right? It doesn't matter like the people's preferences are going to be what they are. And like you said there's like these enabling things around games or software like, you still can't
Mhm,
run certain software that I love and want to use on non-Windows, like it's just okay, well,
yeah,
I guess I'm not going to use that anymore. But it is interesting kind of thinking about kind of the Raspberry Pi, just really the SBC space in in the context of general computing as well. Because personally, I still see it as like this enabling, like, well, Linux system, but you get to access a GPIO and do that
yeah,
sort of thing. I never buy like a gigabyte, you know, motherboard and like, oh, I'm gonna flip a bit on this thing. But I could, right? Like that is a thing that
yeah,
happens. There are vendors that do that sort of thing. I just don't
yeah,
think about it like that because I think about it in a general computing
yeah.
method but I don't think about it any other way, pushing down in general computing down into the pies.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the big difference with the Pi 5 is it's the first generation where I'd say it's not the best Pi for a lot of general Pi use cases. So you can have
Mm,
the Raspberry Pi Zero 2W. I think that might be the most efficient. Like if you're building a little electronics project and you want
yeah.
Wi-Fi on it, that's one of the
Mm,
most efficient ways to do that without having to go down to a microcontroller. And the Pi Zero 2W is finally getting back in stock, but it's also smaller. It requires less power. It's a little
mm.
bit slower, but for the things that you might use GPIO for, most of the time you don't need, a 2016 era laptop
Yeah,
speed.
right, right,
You don't need
right.
to like rip through processing on something where you're just doing, a little bit of GPIO bashing.
Yeah, it's interesting too because like you said, like the costs, obviously coming down, the computing is up, like all of these things. But to me, it still is like a even if it is only 5 watts or 7.5 watts, whatever the low power mode is like is that still what you should be doing? Like the kind of the should you, and there's always a well, people should do whatever they want to do, right? But like
Yeah.
from a system design type of thing, one thing I wonder about too, we had the Raspberry Pi guys on, and they were talking about the reason they had the RP1, and they said
Hmm.
because of the delays, but even the delays are gonna be really high. I feel like the latencies are gonna start to really impact people as well on Pi 5 and above.
It could. Yeah, it's hard because some things it's better, some things it's worse. I like the idea of putting that chip on PCI Express because in my mind that opens up the possibility of like putting a Raspberry Pi into a computer through a cheap add-in card type thing where you have the same programming interfaces and all that, and if you're using PCI Express Gen 4, latencies are going to be very low.
Mm,
I think it's a long-term play for that kind of thing.
sure.
And it also divorces them from the Broadcom chip development a lot, which is nice because I don't think Broadcom is like, man, Raspberry Pi is this thing that
Yeah.
we want
This is our
to
future.
put all of our forces into. I think they're more like,
Right.
yeah, we're gonna keep doing this for you guys.
Well,
Like,
and I think it's not bad marketing for them,
yeah,
it
no,
gives them some goodwill for sure, but I'm sure people aren't like,
yeah,
wanna choose a
yeah.
I
I
signing up for
think that the cool
Broadcom.
thing is that that could enable them to switch to another chip in the future. And I don't think
Yeah,
that'll happen for a Pi 6, maybe even a Pi 7 or something. But if they
yeah,
wanted to, they could start thinking like either a custom chip. I don't think they have the
yeah,
resources for that internally.
yeah, yeah.
Or they could switch to another chip at some point. I keep like in my dreams, Apple would open up the M core designs, and because that chip
But
could live on an SBC and it would be perfect. It would be so fast. it
Mm.
would blow people's minds what you could do on a little SBC, but Apple will never do it. But I
That is
still dream.
that is wow,
Like,
wow,
take
that
an
is
M1 and put it on a Raspberry Pi, the thermals are there. Like,
yeah, no,
it
no,
could
I mean,
handle it.
amazing
It'd
silicon,
be
just, like
crazy.
I don't think you could have chosen a worse company to
I
to be
know.
like, "You should open this up."
I
Yeah,
know.
come on,
You know
Tim."
there's an engineer in there who's like, "I
Oh,
wanna
tons
have
of
this happen."
engineers, right? But, like, they're also getting paid
Yeah,
$400,000 to,
that's
to
true.
fall in
That's true.
line, like, yeah,
They already sold
there are
their
economic
souls.
restrictions around that for sure, yeah. Yeah, no, I was I had asked the question of the Pi folks as well about RISC-V, and then you made a video about it, which I thought was great. Kind of the not yet. They basically said,
Yeah.
"Nah,
You
nah."
know, it's not ready. It's
Yeah.
but it could be. I and the funny thing
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
there are parts of RISC-V that, since it's a more modern ISA, are already better than
Yeah,
ARM, but
yeah.
they're very architectural. It's like, "Yeah, look at this beautiful foundation." It's like, "I wanna live here, though."
Yeah,
It's
right,
gonna take a
right.
long time
There's
to
no
go from the
walls?
foundation to a building. So, yeah, it's
Yeah,
even the fastest RISC-V cores are just they're like, you know, not fast, not
yeah.
helpful, so
Yeah, I think
it's gonna take a
unfortunately,
while.
given the again economic stuff, I mean, like what's it called? Star Five, just Star Five? No, Sci Five. Sci Five
Sci-fi,
just
yeah.
had a bunch of layoffs, and I'm just like,
Yeah,
like yeah, I hate to see it. And like, there's beneficial things coming in the Risk Five space as well, right? Like Broadcom's in the new. They said they're doing Risk Five, which I'm like, okay, sure. And Nordic and Intel, and like, there's a
yeah,
bunch of investment and interest in the area. But we're just not there yet. It's just
yeah.
like,
Yeah, I mentioned in the video, like, it's great for microcontroller level things, and
yeah,
it's also a lot of companies are building their own little cores or customizing a core, for devices to co-process, to do one
yeah, yeah,
task, and it's cheaper for them because they don't pay whatever licensing fee for an ARM M0 or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
But,
yeah. No,
and I think that the thing that that'll enable is, in the future, maybe there is a new chip even from Broadcom that has extra RISC cores for certain purposes.
right.
Apple's really gone to the extremes with that, having like 25 different types of processors on their chip.
Yeah,
And
right.
Raspberry Pi is the other extreme where it's like you get your ARMs and you get a video core GPU thing, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like there's
Yeah.
no neural coprocessor. There's nothing else. Even some of the Rock chip boards are having extra little coprocessors added in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like where what market segment it is very strategic too. They have to kinda like aim that arrow like, 2 years in the past as well. I mean, probably less than 18 months in the past, let's say, just given chip times and deliveries and all that other stuff. And it's
Yep.
yeah, a lot of guess and check, it seems like.
Yeah.
But like you said with I think the RISC-V in the embedded space is really interesting. Like Dave and I have talked about on the show about the CH32 V003 is like the 10-cent RISC-V, and that's a
Hmm.
fun little chip and playing with that. And I don't know, even like the ESP is like the C3 is like way
Yeah.
cheaper than the Extensa core. So it's like
Hmm.
and not that I mean, it's hampered, it's a little bit less beefy, but lower power as a result just because
Yeah.
it's clocking at a lower rate. So fine with me. I just need a
Yeah. It still
Wi-Fi
works
thingy
for
basically.
98% of your projects.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I that's one thing I always kind of run into is like I feel like the reviews you do, it's like you're kind of like on this leading edge type of thing. Like you're like trying this leading edge stuff. I'm just like I'm buying stuff that's 8 years old, and I'm using analog technologies that are like t- 8 nodes back, and just like
Yeah.
so there's always trade offs there.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like, I have to make money, so the hard thing
Yeah,
is
right.
you can't always do the project. Like, I have a couple projects that I have been working on that I would do a video about, but I
Hmm.
know it would get 15,000 views, and
I know.
that's not gonna help my channel, so
I
I don't
know.
do them. So another thing I've thought about is having, like, a second channel or something. I have Geerling Engineering for IT and radio,
Sure, sure.
but, having, like, a second one, like, random projects, and some people do that, but every time you spend a minute editing a video, it's like, that's
Yeah,
a minute I could
totally,
have done something else, so,
totally. Yeah,
yeah.
it's tough. It's
Those
a tough.
things, I still reserve those. Those are my fun projects. You don't get to
Good,
see them. Sorry,
good.
Yeah.
No, I think that's actually a really healthy thing for YouTubers generally too, because it's like if everything has to be content, then it like
Mhm.
starts to make you seize up and be like, oh well, I shouldn't do this unless
Yeah.
I can do it. It's like no, you need to maintain like
Yep.
life, right? You
Yeah.
gotta have your own stuff. So
Yeah.
is that like some embedded stuff that you wouldn't? be able to publish about, you think? Or what's in that realm?
It's just some extra monitoring and automation things I'm doing at the
Okay,
house.
cool.
Like I'm
Cool.
I'm working with the power panel and wiring up everything for power monitoring. And
Yeah.
I'm also working on trying to integrate some battery stuff that I have with my UPS. So I have like dual redundancy in my house. And long term, I'm what I want to have is all my at least one light in every room is on some sort of like PoE backup.
Mm.
That's a long-term thing, but I'm trying to get the battery stuff in place so that I could support running all the lights for, like, 2 days without running my any kind of generator or anything like that.
And this is how Jeff descends into prepperism. Everything's on backup, and I have
Well,
MREs in every wall, and
that's the problem.
I only deal
We
in
do have
gold.
a pile of all of our stuff behind this wall. This is like
Yeah.
the bunker part of my basement, like,
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
there's a tornado siren, which happens, like, 20 or 30 times in the spring here in St. Louis,
Yeah,
everybody
right,
comes
right.
into this room. So, because we have everything that we need. We could live, I
Yep.
think, 2 or 3 weeks before it starts getting really smelly and nasty in here.
Well, you are moving into a new space as well, so you are moving on out to a new commercial space. You've been posting about the horrors of painting. I've seen that one and agreed with it.
You don't realize how much, like, 1,200 square foot of office space, I put it in. There's now 5 rooms, and then
Yeah.
every room, there's 4 walls, and each wall
Yep,
has different things, like,
and they're tall
you're
walls
like,
too,
1,200
so
square feet, not so bad, but when you split it up and you have all these things, then it's, like,
yeah.
so much more cutting in. I had, like, a bruise on my finger here from, holding the paintbrush for so long,
Mm, yeah.
and, that's gone now, but I still have one more wall to paint, and someday
Oh,
I'll paint
man.
that wall. It might never get painted. That might be like
Yeah.
my unpainted wall,
It's
but
your white whale, but it's a wall.
because I gotta move in soon, and once you move in, you
Yeah.
can't paint anymore. So
Is your family excited about reclaiming the basement too? I mean,
my
that's
wife has been for like 3 or 4 months now. Like, so when are you gonna move out? Because I'm gonna move my sewing stuff in that room. I
go,
mean, we
go,
had to.
go.
The kids started taking over more of the basement. So her sewing stuff, because it's not making money for the family. We had to move it into another corner, and then things got moved in front
Ah,
of it. So now she can't do any sewing stuff unless she like grabs
yeah.
her machine and brings it out and sets up a table and stuff. So
Mm,
this is going to become the sewing room. She's been very
cool.
excited about that.
Nice. That's great. Alright, that's the benefits of spreading out a little bit. I mean,
Yeah,
you got a pretty big family there. That's a lot of people, and you democratize the space for all, right? So
yeah,
that's tough. And you gotta
yep,
keep your own space too. So that's nice to have
yeah,
the
yeah.
office.
I might rework the workshop a little bit. It used to be a wood workshop, and then
Mm,
when I
yeah.
started doing videos and stuff, now I can't have sawdust everywhere. So I
Yeah,
haven't
right.
done it. I got rid of most of my woodworking tools, and now I just have like normal general household maintenance tools that are more boring.
Yeah,
But I might rework it a little bit so I could have a wood space that's ventilated and has a door, and
yeah,
then like the other workshop. So we'll see. That could be fun.
yeah. I watch Colin Furze's channel. Colin Furze, yeah, Furze.
Yeah,
And, yeah, like, that new workshop he has, I'm just like, "Oh my god,"
that's
like,
insane.
this yeah, his I mean, he's obviously a very extreme example, but, like,
Yeah.
it's just super easy to get sucked in and be like, "No, I need a metalworking shop. I don't know how to weld, but I
I
totally
need
need one,"
I
like
need my own water jet. I need
yeah,
my own laser
exactly.
cutters.
Yeah, yeah, the things I would build, like the races I will run once I buy the treadmill, I'll finally be
Yeah.
able to go running, right?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, that's great. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you joining us here. I highly recommend people follow your channel if they don't already. Where is the best place to find you online?
My website, jeffgeerling.com. It's been around forever and it will be around as long as I can make it last.
The battery backup on the self-hosted pies in your
Exactly.
basement or office. Yeah.
I did self-host it at home for a short time, but then somebody DDoSed my house
Ah,
and got my ISP to cut off my IP. So I
nah,
decided to
that's no
stop
fun.
trying to do that.
Yeah. This is why we can't have nice things.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, thanks for joining. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to all the future videos about pies and computing embedded. However we can help, let us know.
Yeah. Thank you.